Welcome to CWS Christian Writing and Speaking. I'm your host, Jackie Wilson, and today's guest is the author of Broken and Redeemed, Finding Freedom Through Complete Surrender, which is the recipient of the Literary Titans Gold Book Award. Up until the age of 12, he had no memory of his childhood. It is when he hit adulthood and life circumstances occurred that he had to seek counseling before emotional and spiritual pain. And through the counseling, there were some discoveries, some unexpected discoveries that led him to his knees, led him to God, and completely surrender his life. And now today, he is before us with this book to share his story of brokenness and how through God's grace and mercy, he found his way. Let's welcome to the CWS stage, Mr. John Jarman. Welcome, John.
Jackie, thank you for that very nice introduction. I'm happy to be here. So it's a pleasure to be on your show.
Yeah, thank you so much for coming and just being a part and having the desire to share with our audience. And it's so interesting. You say you had no memory up until the age of 12 concerning your childhood. And it is when life circumstances occurred in your adulthood that made you seek counseling. And it is through that process you started to discover some things, some very painful things about your past. And then you started to do the deep work that led you to this brokenness before God. What is the story, John?
I didn't grow up in a Christian home. My dad was an alcoholic and very violent, and so that's where the trauma comes from. My counselor thinks that not only was he beating up my mom, but he was inflicting pain on us as well. And so, but I don't recall any of it if it happened. So at 12 years old, he left us. And so it was my mom and my three brothers to survive, basically. And so I took control of my life. I did basically from 12 till giving up control. I controlled every aspect of my life, and I didn't completely surrender to God until 2016. And because that control piece was the biggest part of what I wanted to keep, because controlling everything I did from 12 years old, then I became a Marine, then I was a teacher and a football coach. So those are all, controlling positions and stuff. And, I had a lot of pride and ego and wanted things my way during those times. Growing up, I got involved in the drugs because it was the 80s, and so I was involved in drugs and all that stuff, and so I wasn't going down a good path. And then one day I decided, there's more to life than this, and I walked into a Marine recruiting office and I said, "Hey, how fast can you get me out of here?" And he said, "Did you commit a crime?" And I'm like, "Yeah, but I've never been caught." And so 2 months later, I was in Marine Corps boot camp at San Diego, and then after we had been there for about 2 weeks, my drill instructor came in on a Sunday morning and said that we could go to church to get away from them for an hour. And so I went, and I think that's where the seed was planted. Although I didn't really pay attention to too much because I was just trying to get away from the drill instructors for an hour. So, and then I graduated boot camp, went into, served for 4.5 years, got out after Desert Storm, started my college career. I wanted to be a football coach, a PE teacher, because I wanted to help kids not do what I did. And so I got involved in coaching after graduating from college, and started to get involved with FCA chapters that were at the two high schools. And so gradually the knowledge of Christ started to get deeper and deeper. But it really wasn't until I moved back home, and I came back home up to the Pacific Northwest in 2005, and I started to see a pattern of self-destruction and self-sabotage start to happen again. And I was like, I can't do this anymore. And so I sought out counseling. And by the grace of God, Christine Holland, who I worked with off and on for 10 years, was taking new clients. And so I started working with her. And then about 5 years into working with her, I met a gentleman by the name of Scotty Kessler at the church I was attending. And Scotty became my spiritual mentor. And through the work I did with both of them, that's when my faith really started to grow and really started to deepen. I think it was about 2018. I wanted to get deeper into the word. And so I enrolled in seminary school, and I'm 8 hours shy of a master's of theology, because I just wanted to seek the truth of the word even more. And it was 2014 when Christina told me I needed to write a book. And so I kind of laughed at her because, I have dyslexia and, I didn't do well in high school. So I really wasn't a writer. And so I sought out a young lady at church, and she helped me outline the book, and I wrote 5 chapters. But when I finished the 5th chapter, I really didn't know where the story needed to go. So the book sat on the shelf until February of 2021. And in my prayer time one morning in February, I came across Hebrews 10:36, which says, when you're doing the will of God, you must persevere to get what he promised. And then about an hour later, I was at the gym doing some cardio, and I like to read other faith-based books. And so I was reading in A.J. Swoboda's very first book, and he was talking about the will of God. And in the book, he said no one told him if anybody would read his book or buy his book. He just had to write it. And those two things happened that quickly. And I just looked up and I said, okay, I get the message. I got to finish the book. And so I made a commitment to write for at least 2 hours every day. And I finished the book in 4 weeks. So it was just a spiritual dump. And the book came out, then I talked to Scotty, and I was looking for an editor, and he referred me to a young lady that used to be in prayer ministry with him. And so I was like, this is perfect because she'll understand the story. She told me as we started to do the editing that she was a scout for Morgan James Publishing. I was accepted by them in September. And then the next March, I had 500 copies of the book in my hand. So it was just, it happened that quick after I, decided to obey God. And that's how the book came about.
And so when you were mentioning about your past, that's usually associated with PTSD. Obviously, you had suffered some type of PTSD, but you decided to take control and move forward, which is often what people do when they do face trauma, because you don't want bad things to continue. And so as you move forward, you found these places where God was like inserting in your life a little here, a little there, planting and watering those seeds. And now you have this book, which is an award winner. And so what can people find in the book itself?
Well, I think they can find, not only a story of overcoming, but a story of God's power to redeem anybody, no matter what you've been through. Because, there's people that have been down far worse paths than I have, and, they can be redeemed. And it's just, it's a story of hope, I guess, because it's not a how-to book, it's what I did book kind of thing. And so some of the things that I did will work for you, some of them won't. I also have a section in the book because with Scotty's discipling, he allowed me to he calls it the Big 10, and it's 10 steps so that you could disciple. And he allowed me to put that in the book. And so you can find that. And if you wanted to start discipling somebody, you just follow that program, and it works tremendously. And it's, it teaches new Christians how to pray and how to read the Bible and study the Bible. And then it teaches them how to do a gospel presentation and all of that. So it's a unique part of the book there. And it's just a story of how I became vulnerable, because I think for me, I had to lay down my pride. I had to humble myself, and I had to become vulnerable at the foot of the cross. And that's what I did. And when I gave up complete control in November of 2016, is because I was going through a bunch of stuff, and I was just like, I can't do this anymore. I'm turning everything over to you. And then the things that took place after that, and the evidence of God in my life, it just showed me that's what I had to do. And I was so thankful that I did it, because after that, my life has just been calm. I'm not going to say I haven't had my storms, because your valleys are where your faith is developed. And so, I still struggle. I tell people that, I still sin, but I sin less, because you can start to see the triggers that caused the sin before, and you can then pray about it and get it out of you. And it doesn't lead you down that path. And so it's just, that's what they can get out of it is the vulnerable, how you have to lay down, especially your men in your audience. It's hard for us to lay down our pride. and I tell when I speak, I tell the men that you got to put your pride down, you got to put your ego down, you got to become vulnerable, and you got to become humble, and that's the only way you can surrender.
Yeah. What are some of the things that you did to reach where you are?
Well, the biggest thing is working with Scotty in my spiritual life was, I started a daily prayer and scripture reading, because in order to have a relationship with God, you got to understand his word. And the only way you can understand it is to read it over and over. And because every time you read it, it's a little bit different. It's going to speak to you differently based on what you're doing. And that's the beauty of the Bible. And so that daily prayer and scripture reading is the key to having that strong relationship. But when I say that, you still have to have a self examination, because if you don't examine your heart and see what you have to get rid of and what you have to forgive and what you have to seek forgiveness for, I think that they block your religion or your relationship with God. And so you have to really search yourself, and I call it the self-examination. And AJ Swoboda, in his book, he calls it the messy side of Christianity. He says your life gets messier when you meet God, because you have to go through that.
And would you say that as you went through the stage where you reached a point of humility, and what you mentioned forgiveness, did you have to see that you also had to be forgiven?
Oh,
And is
absolutely.
that what led? Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. Then, and I hope, I hope the people that, I heard along the way, I hope they forgive me. I've actually talked to a few of them and they've forgiven me. Because I'm not who I was 3 years ago. I'm not the same person.
Hmm.
I was on a podcast recently, and the host asked me what was the what is the one thing that I truly appreciate now, with where I'm at in my faith walk. And my answer was that I see the world through God's eyes. I see the world differently because of what I've been through, and what God's done for me. And so that's the biggest difference.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think a lot of times that is the big factor, is that, when we look at how people have hurt us and they've caused this trauma to occur in our life, we also have to remember that we're also fallen creatures. And
Oh,
maybe
absolutely.
when, we may do these comparisons of, oh, they're much worse than, and I tell people sin is sin, but
Hmm.
some sin does have long-term consequences where some may not have as,
Correct.
the consequences may not be as harsh, but the reality is we're all continuously falling,
Yep.
and we need God's grace and mercy,
Right.
which is what you've mentioned.
Yeah, and that's where the daily prayer and reading time comes from, is that keeps you grounded, and my time is very early in the morning. I get up at 3:45 because I have to be to work at 5 o'clock. And so I'm up at 3:45, and that's when I do my prayer and reading time, because it sets the stage for the whole day. And it gets me in the mood, and if I skip it once, I can tell the difference of my day. And so I try not to skip it.
Yeah, I totally agree. I tell people all the time, my day cannot get started unless I get
Hmm.
started with God first.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah. So what is next for you, John?
Well, I've got book 2 in the works. It's called The Test of God. And I've got it outlined, and I've written a couple chapters. Not sure how long it's going to take on this one, but it's in the works. And so, that's the biggest thing right now. I'm working on getting speaking engagements. It's tough because I don't have anybody that sets those up for me. So I have a day job, and so it's harder to, get the contacts and then do follow-up calls because I'm working. And so I'm actually looking for someone that can set those up for me, and that way I don't have to worry about that. So, and that's where my next path is. I've submitted to Daystar TV to try to get on a Joyce Meyer show, because I think with her background and what she went through as a young lady, I think that she'll the story for her will be compelling, and hopefully she'll reach out and have me on her show. So
And I think that was a pitch right there. So
yep.
anybody that's listening
Anybody
who's
connected,
connected.
make a call for me. But
John, well, how can people connect with you?
well, they can go to my website. I have a submission tab on my website. It's brokenandredeemed.com. I'm on all social media. It's John Jarman on Facebook. It's John_broken_and_redeemed Instagram. Broken and Redeemed on Twitter. I have all the social media platforms, so they can connect there. If they have any questions or comments, and if they read the book, please, go to my website and tell me share your testimony of going through the book. So the neat part of the book is I put study questions at the end of every chapter, so you could do it with a group of people as a 15-week study, or do it to yourself. And the questions are designed to help you go through that self-examination and to look inside yourself and to see where your faith is and what you're doing in your walk. And so that's a pretty neat part of the book. And it's received a lot of, people who've read the book have told me that they truly enjoy that part of the book. So
Yeah, it sounds so good. John, as we wrap up your interview, what is the one thing that you want to leave with the people?
the biggest thing I would share is to just lay down your pride and become humble, and become vulnerable at the foot of the cross, and let God search your heart. It says David said in the Psalms, search my heart, God, of anything that's not of you. And that's a daily thing. And just let him work in you. Don't fight it. And you'll see a big difference in how you look at the world and what you see God doing in your life when you do that. So
Yeah, I love it. CWS audience, you have heard him. All of us need to do the work to look inside, to see what is broken, what needs to be broken, so that we can be what God is calling us to be. Don't be afraid to take that step. It's scarier to stay in life that is not for you versus moving forward into what God truly wants for you. And He wants you to know that you can be redeemed no matter what your past is.
amen.
John is a testimony to that. So let's do the work, people. Thank you so much for listening to today's episode. And until next time, God bless.